We have been talking about the Satipatthana, really the āNāPāNASATI. So we spoke about it last time, and today we are going to finish it. And so we won't be going too much into it. The only thing is, I want to emphasize one important thing in this sutra. This important thing is that most people today, they talk about what is called the Vipassana meditation. They have a term which was used by the Buddha, and they talk about Vipassana, and that is translated as insight meditation. So the Vipassana meditation is translated as insight meditation. And when we talk about that, the kind of meditation that comes today, really starting in Burma, started by Maha Sayadaw. He is a Burmese monk who started that, and it has spread all over the world now. Everyone speaks about insight meditation or Vipassana meditation and that. But what I find is, this is not really the Vipassana that the Buddha spoke of. So that is why I want to talk about this sutra, just to point out what the Buddha is saying. Where the Buddha talks about this Vipassana. Here the Buddha says, I have of course translated this to make it more meaningful. Here on this paper, which you will get really on this, the stages to awakening. There you get what is called introspective breathing. That is my translation for āNāPāNASATI, usually translated as breathing meditation. Now that I translated as introspective breathing. Why it is called introspective breathing means introspection is to focus your attention inwards and look at what is going on inside you. That is introspective breathing. And here the Buddha says, introspective breathing, when developed and cultivated, bears great fruit and brings great benefits. Now, in the second one is āNāPāNASATI. Instead of introspective breathing, now you are saying āNāPāNASATI. It is the same thing. When developed and cultivated, leads to the fulfillment of the 4 focuses of introspection. That is my translation for Satipatthana. Satipatthana. That is the 4 Satipatthanas. Usually they translate this in a different way. 4 stations of mindfulness or something like that. So instead of calling it 4 stations, I am talking about these are 4 focuses of introspection. We are 4 places we focus on. That is the introspection, looking within. Then it says the 3rd step, Satipatthana, when developed and cultivated, leads to the fulfillment of the 7 steps to awakening. So the Satipatthana, which is the introspection, when fully cultivated and developed, that leads to the 7 steps to awakening. Now I told you that the Buddha is called the awakened one. The meaning of the word Buddha, Buddha means awakening. So the one who has awakened is the Buddha. That means we are normally sleeping. Now I see a lot of new faces today, so that means a lot of new people who have not heard me before. Is that what it is? Huh? Yeah. So these are new things that you are hearing. But others have heard this before, but to some extent it may be necessary to remind you again. But the important thing is that it is necessary to be aware of this. The 7 steps to awakening is what is called Satta Bojjhanga. Satta means 7. Bojjhanga means the steps to awakening. So the process of awakening takes place in 7 steps. That is the meaning. But this is not what is called the Noble Eightfold Path. That is a different thing. Now the 7 steps to awakening is the last part of the Noble Eightfold Path. It is now eightfold means there are 8 steps. And in the 8 steps, if you start from the 7th to the 8th, that is the awakening process. From 7th to 8th is the awakening process. So from 7th to 8th. Now this is why I compared this to the game called golf. You know what golf is? There is only a hole, and into the hole you have to put a ball, small ball. You have to arrange another chair. Huh? You have another one. Good. So, in these 8 steps, the 7th one we are talking about, and when we think about that game called golf, we end that game by somehow putting this ball into the hole. Huh? But we don't start at that point. That is not the starting point. We have to start about a mile or two far away from this hole, and there will be a flag on the hole, a pole with a flag, so that from a far distance you can see where the hole is. That flag is there to point where the hole is. So from a distance you have to start hitting the ball, and you have to hit many times before you come to that last point where you get close to the hole, and it is only at that last step that you give one shot and it goes straight to the hole. Now this Satipatthana is a thing like that. Satipatthana is that last step. This is why the Satipatthana Sutra says, Ekayano ayang bhikkhave maggo, which is wrongly translated as, this is the only way. That is all incorrect. This is not the only way. The only way is what we call the Noble Eightfold Path. This is the last step in that only way. It goes straight to the goal. The goal is the hole. The ball goes straight to the hole at that point. So that is the meaning of Ekayana. Eka means one, Ayana means going towards. Going towards one goal. So it is not going into different places. But the first few shots can be going in all directions. But only at the last point, that one shot will go straight to the hole. That's the important thing. So Satipatthana is not something for the beginner to practice. Today, when people begin to meditate, what do? They do the breathing meditation. Start with the breathing meditation. That is the biggest mistake people are doing. So they think they can become enlightened by just doing the breathing meditation. That is the mistake they are making. So, this is why I had to bring this sutra, your attention to the sutra. So when you practice the āNāPāNASATI, which I call the introspective breathing, when you practice the introspective breathing, the 4 focuses of introspection are developed. That means from the breathing meditation you get on to the 4 focuses of attention. That means what is called Kāyanupassana, Vedananupassana, Chittanupassana and Dhammanupassana. 4 places that you focus your attention on. The important thing to understand, why do you have to focus your attention on these 4 places? We must ask that question. The important thing is, we are organisms in an environment. That's the most important thing to understand. We are organisms in an environment. And as organisms, we have 5 senses: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. 5 senses. And these senses are stimulated by the environment. The senses are stimulated by the environment. That's the important thing to understand. So when the senses are stimulated by the environment, there is a reaction to the stimulus. The organism reacts to the stimulus. And that reaction to the stimulus is what is called perception. We react to the stimulus. That means when the eye is stimulated, we react to it, and that is how we see. When the ear is stimulated, we hear. When the nose is stimulated, we smell. When the tongue is stimulated, we taste. And when the body is stimulated, we feel the touch. Now, all that is the reaction of the organism to stimulation. Now, with this reaction comes desires, hatred, fears, worries, anxieties. That is a disturbance to the whole body. Today, people who talk about stress, they talk about this reaction. So it is this reaction that Professor Hans Selye, who wrote about stress, he spoke about what is called the general adaptation syndrome. The general adaptation syndrome, which is a description of what happens to the body. And that disturbance in the body is what we call stress. So I don't want to go into details about this, because I have already explained these things before. Only thing is the newcomers have not understood it, but we speak about this in the books we have written, and also some of these CDs that we have. So that is how you will be able to get it. Or you can ask the others. So, or maybe come again next time when we begin to discuss. When I come back again. So for this time, today is the last class for this year, I suppose. And I have to be going back to Sri Lanka for a short while, and then I come back and I have to go to the States for a short period, and then I come again somewhere in November. And when I come in November, we can discuss again. So the important thing is that we should, you can during this short period, you can read some of the books and then you'll be able to understand. So the important thing is that a disturbance occurs in the body. That is what is called stress. And so our effort in the meditation is to stop this disturbance. That is the purpose of this whole meditation, is to stop stress. And it is this stress that the Buddha calls suffering, because it is a suffering. So this stress is what we are trying to stop. So it is very important, you know how important it is to learn this meditation. But in learning this meditation, we are only talking about the last step on the Noble Eightfold Path. So we have been talking about this many times and for a long time. So we are just finishing the last steps, even the last steps we have been discussing earlier, but we are now just reminding you about it. The important thing is that these other systems of vipassana meditation, I am trying to tell you that it is a mistake. They are making a mistake. They are missing the most important part of vipassana. And that is the bojjhangas. Bojjhanga means the 7 steps to awakening. And so, the 7 steps to awakening begins with satipatthana. That is the meditation on breathing, which is the introspective breathing. And when the introspective breathing is done, then we get into what is called the 4 focuses of attention. We are focusing the attention on 4 places, and the 4 places really refer to the reaction. I said when the senses are stimulated by the environment, we react to it. And that reaction is what we are looking at. Why do we want to look at the reaction? Because the reaction is going on unconsciously. We are not conscious of what is happening. The reaction is going on unconsciously. So what we are trying to do is to become conscious of the reaction. When we become conscious of the reaction automatically stops, because the reaction cannot go on consciously. It can go on only unconsciously. It is like stealing. You see, stealing cannot be done while someone is watching it. If you watch it, then it is not stealing. So, like that, what is going on unconsciously cannot continue if you become conscious of it. So what is called satipatthana, or normally translated as mindfulness, we call it introspection. So when we do the introspection, what is happening is we become conscious of the unconscious process. And when we become conscious of the unconscious process, the unconscious process stops. That's the reason. So, in this process of stopping this reaction, we are really awakening from the dream of existence. Normally we are dreaming because everything is happening unconsciously. Although we think we are conscious, we are not really conscious. Most of the things we are doing unconsciously. We are carried away by our emotions. Only from time to time we do something consciously. When you go to do a job, you try to do it consciously. Sometimes, even while doing the job, you may be doing things unconsciously. Even when you are driving a car, most of the time you are doing it unconsciously. Only sometimes you become conscious. You see, when we live our lives, we are most of the time unconscious. So here we are trying to become conscious of what we are doing. This is the important thing. So when we begin to practice the satipatthana, we are really cultivating consciousness. We are trying to be conscious instead of unconscious. That is the meaning of satipatthana. So, the awakening process, which is the 7 steps to awakening, of course, we cannot discuss this in detail today because it's a long process. You have to go step by step. And going step by step is very long process. There you are. The sati, important thing is that...
Follow the notes, Bhante. Pages. Flip more pages. The front page only.
Okay.
You're still looking at the front page only, Bhante. There are 7-8 pages there.
Oh, yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, I didn't read this earlier, that's why. So the important thing is, this diagram here in the first page is very important. This first diagram, āNāPāNASATI, then goes to satipatthana, then goes to satta bojjhanga, and the last one is vijja and vimukti. So āNāPāNASATI is the starting point, and when we practice the āNāPāNASATI, which is introspective breathing, then we begin to get into what is called the Satipatthana. The Satipatthana is the 4 focuses of introspection. And then we get into Satta Bojjhanga, which is the 7 steps to awakening. And from the 7 steps to awakening, we get into Vijja and Vimukti. Vijja means awakening, consciousness. The true consciousness. I said earlier that normally we are unconscious. Now we become fully conscious. That full consciousness is Vijja, and Vimukti means we are freed of all the problems. That is the Nibbana. What is called Nibbana is really the freedom from all the troubles after that.
Bhante, the last page, maybe you should explain the last page.
Last page?
Yeah, you should explain the last page.
What is the last page?
The last page of the notes.
The last page is simply you mean introversion of attention, Dhamma Vicca Virya Piti Passadhiya. Yeah, we are coming to that. Yeah. But I wanted to... Yeah, we might not be able to go through all these things, but the important thing is to get on to the last page here, where we are really talking about the 7 steps in the process of awakening. And the 7 steps, the first step is this sati, which is that focusing attention on 4 places. Now the reaction that occurs, how do we become aware of it? The reaction we become aware of first as a physical thing. Now when you open your eyes, if you see someone who is very attractive, maybe sexually attractive or something like that, your reaction will be first seen as a change in your body. You can look at the body and find out what has happened to my body now. What? Voice disappeared. Yeah. Still, you hear me? No. You did something, huh? Huh? Okay. Now, now you hear. Now, important thing is that the reaction first is in the body. So you become aware, you focus your attention on the body to see what has happened to my body. That is called Kayanupassana. Kayanupassana is focusing on the body. And then you begin to focus on how you feel in the body. How do I feel? Am I feeling comfortable or uncomfortable? What is happening to my feeling in the body? How the body feels is very important. So that is Vedananupassana, the feeling. Then the next thing that to observe is what kind of emotion was aroused. When I saw that thing, whatever it is, what kind of emotion was aroused? Was it coming in the form of a sexual desire, or is it coming in the form of anger, or is it coming in the form of fear, or is it coming in the form of a worry? What's the emotional state? That is Chittanupassana. Then the other thing is, what kind of thought occurred in my mind? When I saw this individual or whatever I saw, what kind of thought arose in my mind? To become aware of the thought is what is called Dhammanupassana. There, Dhamma means the thought that arose. Here we don't refer to the teaching of the Buddha, we are simply referring to the thought that came into the mind. Dhammanupassana. Now very often these things are translated as mental objects or something like that. But these are not mental objects, these are thoughts. This is the thought that came into the mind. And then you begin to discover that it was the thought that started this whole thing. It is the way you interpreted what you saw. It is the thought that started the emotional excitement. So if you can change the thought, that emotion will not be aroused. Now this is for the modern kind of psychology called cognitive psychologists. They have begun to realize this. Earlier, Sigmund Freud thought that these emotions cannot be got rid of because they are all built into the system. But later, another school of psychology came up called cognitive psychology. They began to understand that the way you interpret your circumstances determines what kind of emotion is aroused. So their method of what is called cognitive therapy is to teach people to interpret your circumstances in a different way. And by interpreting the circumstances in a different way, it is possible to change the emotional excitement. That's the important thing to understand. Now, in the first verse in the Dhammapada, the Buddha says this. The first verse in the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma. Mano refers to the thought you think. Mano means the thought you think. Pubbangama means comes before or precedes. The mano, the thought, precedes. That means how you interpret your circumstance is what determines the kind of emotion that comes up. And it is this emotion that will make you act in a certain way. So if you learn to interpret things in the proper way, there will be peace and happiness in the world. And if you begin to interpret things in the wrong way, you will be suffering as a result, and you are also producing suffering in other people. Because you will be fighting and quarreling, creating all the problems. Now today you find that in the world, everyone talks about peace. There should be peace in the world. But everyone is fighting. Why? You cannot have peace if you begin to interpret things in the wrong way. So it is the interpretation that is creating all the problems. So, now when you begin to become aware of this unconscious process, that is called Dhamma Vichaya. Dhamma Vichaya really thought analysis. It is the analysis of the thought. It is the thought that is responsible for this arousing the emotion. So if you begin to analyze the thought, then you begin to see that that is only a thought and it is not a fact. What you take to be a fact is simply a thought, the way you interpreted it. So that power of the thought becomes less when you look at the thought. There are other ways of interpreting the same situation. There is no only one way. So whenever you are angry over someone because someone did something, you can always revise, question, is this interpretation correct or not? The moment you question that, you begin to see that the power of that emotion gets lost. So this is why the thought analysis, Dhamma Vichaya. When you do that, the power of your thought is lessened and the power of the emotion is lessened. So now you are able to gain control over the emotion because the power of the emotion is gone. That is what is called virya. That means the thinking part is now able to gain control over the emotional part. Now, Sigmund Freud used two words to refer to the thinking part and the emotional part. The emotional part was called the id, id, and the thinking part was called ego. So here the ego becomes powerful enough to stop the emotion. Otherwise, usually when the thinking part and the emotional part are in conflict, who wins? Emotion wins most of the time. But now, when you have done this, the emotion becomes weak and the thinking part is strong. And so, that is called virya. And when that strength comes, then comes piti. Your mind is happy. That is the serenity of mind. Piti is the serenity of mind. Now the mind is not agitated, not excited. The mind is calm and tranquil. Now that with the coming of the serenity, the body relaxes. The body relaxes. All the tension in the body is relaxed. And when the body relaxes, what happens? Huh? Well, when the body relaxes, the mind calms down, stillness of the mind. And that is, you are entering samadhi. Samadhi is not concentration, samadhi is tranquility of mind. So when the mind is tranquil, then comes introspection. Introspection, upekha, which is really something more than introspection. Because their sati was introspection. But here, when you say introspection, now when I look at this glass, the glass is the object. So I am looking at the object. Now instead of looking at the object, there is another thing I can do, which is to become aware of how I see the object. In other words, I am looking at the process of perception. When I look at the process of perception, then I see it in a different way. Now to explain this, I use an analogy. The analogy is, now if I have a mirror here, and in front of the mirror I get a bird. I put the bird in front of the mirror. What does the bird do? The bird will start pecking at the mirror. Why? Because the bird thinks there is another bird inside. Huh? But now I take the bird out and put your face there. What happens? When you put your face there, then what happens is, you will be looking, oh, I have a pimple here. You are looking. You see, because now you know that this is not another person on the other side, this is your own face. So it is like that. The bird is only seeing what is there. Whereas you know how that picture is seen. It is a reflection of your own face. So in the same way, instead of looking at the object, we are looking at the process of perception. The moment you look at the process of perception, everything changes. So this is the real difference. Now that is what we call a paradigm shift. It is called a paradigm shift in the sense that your way of looking at the world and seeing the world changes. That is the meaning. So in this way, this is the important thing to understand. So it is in this way that we begin to see things from a different point of view, and when we begin to see the world in a different way, instead of thinking of existence, we are thinking of experience. This is not an existence, but an experience. Now, when you see it as an experience, the object disappears and the subject also disappears. Because in every experience, now for example, I see a glass here with water. Now that is an experience. Now in this experience there are two parts to it. One is what I see. What I see is one part of the experience. Then how I see is the other part of the experience. What I see as an object. How I see is a subjective experience. So, there is an objective experience and a subjective experience. The subjective experience is personalized. The objective experience is alienated. These are the two words to express that. The object is always outside and the subjective experience is within us. That is personalized. So, when I begin to personalize, I identify the subjective experience as mine and myself. The objective experience is something outside. So that is how the idea of self comes into being. But when we have seen this whole process, then we begin to see that there is only the experience here. There is no real subject, there is no real object. There is only the experience. It is only when we have understood this fully that we become free of all troubles. All the trouble comes from the subject and the object and the relationship between the subject and the object. You have a question? No. Okay. So that is what it is. So I think for today that is quite enough.